morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Cybersecurity and Rail Operations in Canada consultation session. My name is Vince Guglielmo, Director of Innovation Initiatives here at QTRIC, joined by Morgan Cool on our ZEB project team, who will be facilitating in behind the scenes, and as well as Jenny and Fatima, who are supporting, and you'll meet them a little later on. Before we begin, I'd like to do our land acknowledgement. I'm currently located in Hamilton, Ontario, and in the spirit of respect, reciprocity, truth, we honor and acknowledge the lands which constitute the present-day city of Hamilton, situated.
I'm just.
Sorry, can we mute people? Thank you. Sorry. Situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississauga. The land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that the land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, which is North America, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. As well, QTRIC's actions go beyond the land acknowledgement. We have a gender and racial diversity policy in place that encourages hiring of diverse voices. We support Indigenous-led businesses when possible with contracts to support economic growth within and among our Indigenous communities. We support ongoing research and federal investment into exploration, investigation, and analysis of missing and murdered Indigenous persons and the mass and unmarked graves of children that went missing in the residential school system in Canada. We strive to make Canada a greener place and support climate change initiatives, including through innovation that supports better mobility in Indigenous communities. Next slide. Just some housekeeping items. I'm sure we're all familiar with Zoom housekeeping. There's the mute and the video button. So if you can please mute yourselves during this call until we speak later on. Next slide. We're familiar with the buttons at the bottom. There's the live transcripts if you want transcripts, the chat, which is where you should put any comments or questions along the way, and our participant count. Next slide. Thank you. Before we begin, I just wanted to go back to that video. We have our Smart Rail Innovation Conference coming up on March 20th, 2024. Our staff is putting in the links for you if you would like to see our agenda, speakers, and sponsorship opportunities. And because today is a special day, everyone in attendance is eligible for a 30% discount if you register today or tomorrow. There is an actual code that will be put in. It's Cyber Rail 30. If someone can, is it in there? I'll just type it in.
Yeah, okay. So the way we
If you use that code, you'll be able to get your 30% discount on registration. And so with that, we'd like to have you come to our conference, join, and you'll hear from many interesting speakers and perspectives as we move forward. Next slide. So I'd like to call the meeting to order. Next slide. On the screen here is an example of our attendees today. We have over 80 registered today, many from the same organization. Next slide. Our agenda will be a brief welcome. Then we'll just have a bit of a cybersecurity overview, and then we'll go right to the speaker presentations, which is really what you're here for. And then after that, we will go into focus group discussions where we will divide each attendee. You'll be automatically moved into a focus room, and we'll go over 2 questions. Ask the group to comment on those 2 questions, and please feel free to comment as much as you wish. We will have minute takers there. Then we'll regroup. We'll come back, have a bit of a summary of what was mentioned in each of those breakout sessions, and then our moderator will summarize everything, and we will adjourn. Next slide. So today we are here for session number 6 from a future perspective, cybersecurity and rail operations in Canada. Next slide. A few years ago, we underwent, actually in 2022, we underwent a broad consultation study with many constituents in the industry and government, and we came up with 6 topics that were at the soul of what we should be looking at in terms of technology innovation themes. Hydrogen rail, battery electric bus integration with rail charging equipment, passenger data analysis, autonomous rail crossings, cybersecurity, which is what we're doing today, and coming up next month, high-frequency rail versus high-speed rail policies. Next slide. Our history on this was in 2020, there was a study that produced the top 10 technology areas for passenger and freight rail. There was a report. From that, we convened our groups, and we came up and got to where we are today, which is our Smart Rail Innovation Program. Along that journey, the Zero Emission Transit Fund was announced by the Government of Canada, and QTRIC was selected as a Zero Emission Transit National Planning Service from Infrastructure Canada in 2022, where we help transit agencies and municipalities plan for, evaluate, do feasibility analysis, and lead to implementation of zero emission buses. And then from there, we have our Smart Rail Innovation Program, which is where we are today, and our conference coming up in March. Next slide, please. So what is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is technologies, processes, and practices designed to protect networks, devices, programs, and data from attack, damage, or unauthorized access. Why is it important? Because it's all about the data that is collected, and we generate tons of data everywhere we go, and it's stored somewhere. A breach can create harmful and catastrophic results. Next slide. Some of the challenges and impacts of cybersecurity: there's network security, application security, endpoint security, data security, identity management, database and infrastructure security, cloud security, mobile device security, and disaster recovery and business continuity planning. So with that, that's the limit of my cybersecurity knowledge. That's why you're here, and that's why we have some experts on the call. I've given just a brief overview, and now what I'd like to do is introduce our moderator, Mark Littler, and he will take us through the rest. But just so you know, Mark is a transportation communications engineer with over 28 years of comprehensive electrical and systems engineering and project management experience in the United States and the United Kingdom. Mark is specialized in the design and management of telecom systems supporting rail and transportation facilities. and intelligent transportation systems from concept development through to construction. Notable projects include the World Trade Center Transportation Hub and the Geothal's Bridge replacement, both in New York City, where Mark led the electronic systems design teams. Mark currently serves as the systems engineering lead for the technical advisory on the Ontario Line subway project in Toronto. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you to Q-Trick for hosting this. We've got a really great panel today with three really good speakers. I'd like to introduce, first of all, Lucia Caponia. She's the Cybersecurity and Software Assurance Technical Lead and Team Leader with Sistra UK and Ireland. Lucia's got over 17 years experience in software and cybersecurity. She's a computer science engineer and systems engineer with experience in software, cybersecurity, configuration management, requirements management, project management, and verification and validation, with a background in multiple industries, including railway, defense, oil, gas, and renewable energy. Lucia represents the UK in several CENELEC and IEC standardization groups, such as WG28 for the EN 50128 and the new cross-sector software standard, EN 50716, WG26 for the TS 50701 cybersecurity technical specification for the new IEC 63452 international standard for cybersecurity rail applications, and WG15 for the EN 50129. Lucia's experience makes her knowledgeable in both safety, software, and cybersecurity, and their interactions as well as their conflicts across a system lifecycle. Lucia is experienced in preparing and delivering training courses on safety, software, cybersecurity, and related standards, including seminars and webinars for national and international events. I'm sure you're going to really enjoy the presentation. Over to you, Lucia.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for this fantastic presentation. So, can we move to the next slide, please? So today, hello everyone. My name is Lucia Caponia. Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. I really appreciate it. Today, I will take you through a brief panoramic on cybersecurity for rail applications with focus on standards and their status. Next slide, please. This is about me, but Mark did already a great job, so I think we can skip it. Please go to the next one. Okay, so let's look into the contents of this presentation briefly. After a quick intro on why cybersecurity is important, we will look into the classic cybersecurity goals and pillars, and we will discuss the main operational technology standards and their status. I will conclude on the presentation. Next slide, please. Let's start with the introduction. Next. Click, please. So, can you click, please? Okay, we moved from the first part of this. So if you look at the bottom of this slide, you will see that 20 years ago, we were subject to very small group of attacks. So this data on the screen are essentially info that I have taken from Information is Beautiful. It is a website that collects all sorts of data. In here, you can see data breaches filtered by sensitivity and organized chronologically. Click, please. So in 20 years, we moved from that to that. What is the importance of this picture? Well, it shows essentially that the situation exploded. And it is evident that today data has a perceived value that is much higher than before. And as a consequence, this means that we are subject to more attacks, that we need to be more careful with the data. Next, please. So it is a fact that essentially our day-by-day life is technologically dependent, isn't it? So I manage my data using apps on a phone for everything. So from appointments, school meetings, work tasks, and much more. So what happens if technology disappears today? Well, it will be a disaster. Or if the data are not available, it will be a disaster. So many systems that were mechanically only now are digitalized and connected and interconnected through the internet as well. What does this mean? This means that also rail transport and infrastructures have this kind of technology implemented. Then cybersecurity is important because it helps business and organization to prevent that costly and harmful cybersecurity attacks happen. So it also helps preventing reputational damages as a consequence of those attacks. And it is crucial to safeguard all type of data, so personal and business related, from theft, loss, and manipulation. Next, please. So let's look into goals and pillars now. Next. So this is the classic triad. So the CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. These three properties are in practice the cybersecurity goal. Now, to protect the confidentiality of the data, organizations need to make an effort to keep it secret or private, preventing unauthorized access, but also the unauthorized disclosure of the data. So if this is not there, so if confidentiality is compromised, the risk is for the business that crucial and critical information are leaked. If this happens, then the data can be used for various scope. The bad thing is that if this happens, organizations usually do not discover the breach immediately, but after a while, if they discover it, and sometimes they discover it too late when the data is used improperly to access their system or to create reputational or cost damages, economical damages to their organization. The integrity instead aims to make sure that the data is trustworthy and free from tampering. So if the integrity is compromised, we may have a different scenario at operational level, but one of which is for sure the possibility, the potential safety impact on the operations. But even if data is kept confidential and its integrity is maintained, data it's useless if it is not available. So availability is another important property data should have. So if data is not available and the availability is compromised, then key systems may be not available. And again, we can have a business operation that are affected or disrupted. Next slide, please. So very often, cybersecurity is associated with technology only. There is sometimes actually there is also the, the confusion that cybersecurity and software are the same thing, but this is another matter. However, cybersecurity in reality is based on three pillars. These three pillars include technologies, an important aspect of the cybersecurity, but also people and processes. In particular, people are the most valuable asset for an organization, but at the same time, they are also the biggest weakness of an organization. So we need to educate, to empower people, to identify, to avoid threats, and to react to the cyber attacks. When we look into the processes, what are the processes? Are the tool that establish the method to achieve the cybersecurity goals. And together, the technology that give the solution to protect the data and the systems, they represent the facility tools around cybersecurity. So all three are essential to support cybersecurity. It's like a stool. If you remove a leg, the stool is going down. Next, please. So we also very often talk about IT security, OT security, but what is the difference? Well, the difference is in the definition of the information technology and the operational technology, in my opinion, where the IT refers to anything that is computer technology, including hardware and software, and the IT security aims to protect the data that are managed through them. So instead, the operational technology is the use of this hardware and this software to control physical processes, device and infrastructure. So DOT aims to protect the industrial systems instead, not directly the data, but protecting the data helps protecting the industrial system. So the two words are not separate, are complementary instead. So essentially, operational technology that is controlled by information technology is subject to cyber risks and attacks, and we need to keep this under consideration in our world. Next, please. How we do that? Well, we look into standards and the guidelines that they can give us. At least I do that. So I want to distinguish between the cybersecurity goal and the cybersecurity standards goal before going ahead. the goal of the cybersecurity is to protect the railway system from cyber attack. But instead, the cybersecurity standard goals has the scope to give guidelines to make this happen. So this is the main difference between the two. Now, let me say, for the risk management of IT systems, the most used approach are requirements from the ISO 27700 family, but also the NIST cybersecurity framework. For OT systems, the framework used are the IC 62443 and the TS 50701, where the TS is the technical specification of CENELEC level implemented in Europe. So those standards or approaches are often used in a complementary way to address both IT and OT systems. So both are needed. Actually, the TS, the 5071, explicitly referenced the NIST and the ISO 2700, the family, just to make sure the message, how they are important, they need to work together. Next, please. So let's start looking briefly into the 62443 series. So the ISA 62443 series of standards provides a framework to address and mitigate the security vulnerabilities for the industrial automation control systems. So describes both the technical and the process-related aspect of the industrial cybersecurity, provides a risk management approach, especially for OT systems. And this approach can be applied also to the OT used in the railway sector. Actually, it has been one of the main references until the TS was issued, but it is still used a lot across. In particular, if we look into one of the standards, that is the 3-2, that is the Security Risk Assessment and System Design standard. So this one defines a set of measures to guide the organization to the process of assessing the risk and to identify how to apply security countermeasures. So it's fundamental, and it's used a lot in rail, but in many other industries as well. Next, please. When we look into the TSs, the TS 5071 has been developed for the first time, has been issued for the first time in 2021. After 5 years of long work. So I'm part of the committee that writes this technical specification, and it has been a huge effort. Why? Because we had to put together two different words. The first one was the rail framework through the standards that belong to rail mainly, that is the 50126, that correspond to the international version, that is the IC 62278. So this effort has been huge. Why? Because rail had to meet cyber, and the life cycles were completely different. So we had to map the activities and the tasks of the cyber into the life cycle that is used for rail, so that this would help to reduce costs and make sure people are applying the principles. So essentially, this one covers from concept to decommissioning, but it excludes though the product level, and points to the 62443 again for this level. Why? To give flexibility in the usage of a component of the shelf that can be assessed or can be developed using different models. Next, please. And essentially, this is the life cycle that is the EN 50126 life cycle. And in here, the activities have been mapped for the cybersecurity. As you can see, the product life cycle is excluded from the scope of the TS. Next, please. When I want to talk about the relationship, similarity and differences when we talk about safety and cybersecurity. When the risk identified is not acceptable, is not to an acceptable level, the classic approach adopted by safety is to find a mitigation and eventually allocate a safety integrity level. After the implementation of the mitigation and after this has been proved as effective, then the risk goes down to an acceptable level. And if changes are not introduced, usually in safety, this stays. Okay, this does not change. However, historically, the control systems were isolated, and now they are not anymore isolated. What does it mean? That we are going to evaluate what happens with the additional technology, with the digitalization. Is the cybersecurity affecting safety? Is this approach still valid? Let's see. Next slide, please. So when we look into the security risk as risk evaluation, assessment, and management, instead, we have a different kind of view, right? So as for the safety, once the risk has been identified to have an unacceptable level of risk, then a mitigation is identified, so a security requirement is identified, security level is determined for this requirement, then it's implemented and proof is effective. Yes, perfectly. And as for the safety, it goes down to an acceptable level of risk. And even if we do not introduce any change into the system, what happens though? It happens that as soon as a new vulnerability is discovered, we may end up going back to a level of risk that is not acceptable again. Then a fix must be implemented to take the risk to an acceptable level again. Then in a specific moment, in a specific point of time, we know so much about vulnerabilities, but there is much more that we don't know yet. They can be hidden because simply not discovered yet, or because the technology is evolving all the time, right? What happens if the system that is affected by this issue contributes to a safety function? Is the safety risk assessment management changing shape? Well, I think we should take this under account. How? Well, there is a standard that in 2018 started looking into that. Next slide, please. And it's the 50129. The international version of this standard is the 62425. And specifically tells us that the safety management process aims to minimize the residual risk of safety-related systematic fault and security threats so far as the safety is concerned, and looks into two kinds of threats, the physical security and the IT security. Now, this standard is evolving again, and IT security will be replaced with the cybersecurity to cover more the scope. I'm part of this standard as well, by the way. So how it happens, though? It happens that as soon as a CHENELEC standard is issued, the international standard will incorporate the changes into the international version of this standard. This is still ongoing, so probably the latest version of the international standards doesn't have all these elements inside, but we'll have something, I think will be issued in July 2024. Next, please. So safety standards are looking into this aspect. Again, if we go back to the TS, this aspect has not been neglected even. So, and a mechanism called the security-related application condition has been implemented to make sure that the security risk that can affect the safety are passed to the safety. So information happens, the communication is there. These two words may be separated, but they need to stay in touch because one can influence the other. And also there is this diagram, the one that you can see on the screen, that explains how the exchange of info and evidence happens between the safety team and the cybersecurity team. Next, please. So what happens next? We have seen a little bit of the evolution of the standards up to now, and we said that the 62425 will be issued in 2024. There is a new standard that is ongoing. It's not been issued yet. And again, I'm part of the standardization group. This will be the horizontal standard for rail applications at the international level, and is the 63452. We aim to issue it in 2026, definitely. It's been already voted, the comments received, we are implementing the comments, and hopefully this will go smooth up to the end. This provides a consistent approach to the management of cybersecurity of railway systems. Again, rail and cyber needs to meet. One of the main inputs has been the TS 701, because this exercise was already done, but essentially we are going to merge the process, the life cycle given by the 62278, that is the life cycle for rail, RAMS rail, with the principles and the techniques and the tasks in the 62443. Next, please. Let's conclude on this topic. Next. Okay, so standards, regulations, law, they are evolving, they are improving. But despite the effort that we are putting there, unfortunately, the cybersecurity aspects are not under control in real application. It's a fact. So the situation is not fully under control. But why is that? There are many legacy systems, and they are still in use, and they cannot be replaced easily because this will affect anyway the operations. But also, new systems are developed standalone. The integration issues, the full picture, the full rail system is not considered when evaluating the cybersecurity risks. It's an additional element that must be considered. There are additional issues when there are interconnection between. So we need to do more in that sense, but also there is really a problem. We don't have enough experts yet, so we need to work on people. What can be done to cover this gap? People is an essential element, as I said before. First, 98% of the attack involve social engineering. So they can help preventing, but also they are our first line of defense. I still believe this is true. And they can help preventing, managing, and reacting to the system. You can have a resilient system. You can have a security by design. That's great. But people can help and support this in a way that the security is in place. We may need stronger regulation to support more the industry, to achieve a specific degree of resilience, but also we need to start thinking to a plan to replace those legacy systems in order to adapt them in order to reduce the risks. But many other stuff, I'm sure. And this is it. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening through this part of the full event.
Thanks very much, Lucia. I was really interested in as how the standards are evolving along with technology and the people and processes aspects. If everyone can hold their questions for now, or if you do want to ask a question on a specific topic, if you want to feel free to put it in the chat and we'll address that question later. I'd like to now introduce Susan Howard. She's a Vice President of Industrial Control Systems and Operational Technology and the Cybersecurity Practice Lead at Michael Baker International. Susan started a career in cybersecurity and technology in a program for at-risk youth in high school, and she quickly found her calling. She did a tour of duty in the United States Air Force and became obsessed with cryptography, networks, and telecommunications. Since then, Susan has designed, managed, and secured large campuses, hospitals, telemedicine, electric utilities, factory automation, autonomous vehicles, rail systems, federal facilities, water and wastewater treatment plants, and a county jail. That's quite a resume there, Susan. She also published a wireless autonomous vehicle environment network management model as part of a master's thesis at UC Boulder College of Engineering in 2010, where she then went on to work for Intel Corporation. Susan, impressive resume. Really looking forward to the presentation. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks, Lucia. That was a great rundown of all of the current standards efforts. So I will skip that part of my presentation, thankfully. This is an encore presentation from one that I did with Hack the Rail, and I see Rourke from Silas is on the webinar. Hello, and Tyreek was also there presenting. So I'm going to make this quick because I want to focus on the high consequence events or the crown jewels in light rail systems. You can go to the next slide, please. You can skip a couple slides. I spent 10 years doing light rail systems engineering, and you have my bio. You can skip. Next. Next, again, I'm going to focus on the crown jewels and high consequence events. And these are some of the key takeaways. Yep, you can go ahead. Light rail, one quick thing for those that aren't familiar with light rail is called light rail because the vehicles are lighter and the speed of the vehicles is lower than regular passenger commuter rail. And it also operates intercity. Next. Next. You can keep going. I thought this was interesting. I first did a presentation like this in 2006 for the American Passenger Transportation Association. And not a lot has changed, unfortunately, in 17 years. Well, this is just a rundown of the components of a light rail communication system and the cybersecurity topics that were addressed back then. Next, please. And then this is a list of agency pitfalls. As you can see, in 2006, we still have some of the same pitfalls at our transit agencies. There's lack of funding for operations. IT is very well funded, but OT not so much. Not a lot of documented security policies. Although, as Lucia noted, you know, the standards development process is very well maturing. We just need to get our agencies to jump on board that train as well. Next, please. And so in the beginning, back in early 2000s, 2001, people were doing attacks like SQL Slammer and SQL injection attacks just to cause disruption. Now, the attack agencies or the attack the attack groups are hoping to monetize, right? So we're seeing a lot of ransomware out there, mostly on the IT side. And when we have an OT or an IT ransomware event, typically the OT side is disconnected so that it can prevent any spreading into the OT side. Next, please. We're also seeing cyber attacks during wartime, as witnessed recently with the water treatment plant attacks on Israeli equipment. We're going to see more and more cyber attacks used in socio-political situations. This is an example of the Poland RF attack on a Polish railway. Next, please. These are just a rundown of all of the systems that are involved in light rail, and those haven't changed a lot in a long time. Next, please. These are an example of the protocols that are used in light rail systems. We're seeing a lot more IP than we used to. Other than that, those protocols have been pretty static over the past 20 years, 20 or 30 years. Next, please. What's nice is that the National Institute of Standards and Technology has a new Rev 3 out, and they have included a picture of rail systems in their new version. So that's great that we are acknowledging now that there are cybersecurity concerns in light rail systems. Next, please. This is just another example of the feature characteristics of light rail systems. Mostly they are fiber ring topologies, although we are seeing some gigabit Ethernet network topologies like the one that I did in Denver RTD way back in 2001. Next, please. I won't go over this. I think Lucia covered the whole risk quantification pretty well, but it's a very big factor in the assessments that we do for light rail systems. Next, please. Okay, high consequence events. This is the meat of my topic today. So there are too many things in typical transit agencies to be able to secure all at one time. So what the Department of Energy for the electric utility agencies has done is ask them to consider their high consequence events. What are the things that a bad guy can do that really, really impact human life, can cause the agency's ability to provide a critical function that can cause lack of operations and operational failure. So again, the Department of Energy and Idaho National Labs is asking us all to look at the high consequence events in all of our OT systems. So for light rail systems, next please. I'm saying there are three crown jewels that if these three crown jewels are impacted, loss of life can occur as well as operational issues. Those are traction power substations, tunnel systems, and signal systems. For light rail systems, these are the crown jewels. Next, please. This is an example of a traction power substation, which is joined with the catenary system. It's sometimes called a traction electrification system. Next, please. And this is a diagram of a typical traction power system. The cables are connected to the traction power substation via the wayside distribution system. And there are overhead catenary systems that run the light rail. Next, please. So what can a cyber attack do on a traction power substation or traction power system? There are arc flash protections that can be disabled via SCADA equipment. There are transfer trip protections which isolate a problem to one substation from magnifying across the entire light rail system. That SCADA can be attacked and transfer trip protections can fail. And then there's also stray current monitoring, which can be attacked. Next, please. Tunnel control systems. So more and more, there are a lot of Internet of Things sensor devices involved in tunnel control systems on light rail. The tunnel control systems are critical functions, and typically the control systems that monitor and control the environment in passenger rail tunnel are all redundant, and they have a separate control center than the regular control systems for the light rail. Next, please. So these are some of the things that tunnel control systems do, and this was actually an APTA paper that was written several years ago. Tunnel control systems maintain breathable air, identify fire incidents, and so one of the primary things that many of us in the business know, if you want to successfully take something down, you want to disable your alarming first. And so disabling the alarming for fire systems and other critical functions in a tunnel control system can lead to a very successful attack that could lead to loss of life or injury. Next, please. So again, a cyber attack on a tunnel control system or SCADA system can cause failure of a tunnel ventilation system. It can cause failure of fire detection and suppression system, and failure of critical power systems. And these are vital systems in tunnel controls that need to be maintained. One example of a BART fire resulted in loss of human life back in 1979 in the Transbay Tube incident. That was not a cyber attack, but it's an example of how a fire incident can lose human life within a tunnel control system. Next, please. I won't go into all of the different considerations for signal systems, but the question we all ask ourselves when we're designing a greenfield light rail system is, should we do CBTC or fixed block signaling? And each of those has their own cybersecurity considerations to think about. Fixed block signaling allows us to maintain blocks of light rail segments so that there are many fail-safe options should one block fail. On the other hand, CBTC is much faster and leads to faster headways, but it's kind of like putting all of your eggs in one basket. Unless it's done correctly, you can lose the entire alignment, the entire signal alignment with CBTC. There are a lot of considerations there. Next, please. Again, the crown jewels in a light rail system, of course, include signal systems. Fixed block does have fail-safe mechanisms so that if the signaling SCADA system is attacked, you still have other ways of maintaining rail safety. Next, please. This is a CBTC system, which is much more automated, has automated controllers within the signal system. Those can also be secured, but they take a lot more design thought to ensure that you have fail-safe, maybe fail-safe back to fixed block when you do a CBTC system. Next, please. So cyber attacks on signal systems can lead to certain high consequence events. For instance, in CBTC, you know, you can have failure of your radio frequency or intentional jamming, which renders the signaling unavailable. And if you don't have a secondary system, that could lead to trouble and possible human injury. CBTC or SCADA systems attacks can render the signaling system unavailable for the entire alignment. And if you don't have a secondary system, again, that could be problematic. So also failure of a secondary, such as voice radio or emergency blocks for CBTC or fixed block, could render the signaling system unavailable during a cyber attack. Next, please. So this is just bit of a future ahead look at light rail systems, cybersecurity. Continuous monitoring is a must. It's no longer a nice to have. Of course, artificial intelligence is making its way into continuous monitoring platforms. Heuristic algorithms are already there. They've been there for quite some time. You know, the question that a lot of my agencies ask is, you know, are all signal systems going to be CBTC in the future? And so that is something that we all need to consider when we're designing CBTC. What happens during a cyber attack? What is the fail-safe? Our light rail vehicles are getting smarter. There's IoT gateways for predictive maintenance on these rail vehicles. And next, please. This is just an example of an Internet of Things case study that I did for a transit agency on the West Coast of the United States, where the Internet of Things really, on the light rail vehicles, participated in a global, or not global, but a local cloud of IoT, which included the smart city functionality. Next, please. And so this is all of the regulatory and policy information that I presented at Hack the Rail, but I just wanted to go over the TSA directive real quick. That's the Transportation Security Administration in the United States. So I'll just touch on that real quick. Next, please. So the TSA has a directive that's been was released originally in 2021, but it's been extended through 2023 and 2024. Excuse me. And these are the things that TSA said. If you're a passenger rail system, and there's a list of them that are the major high visibility passenger rail systems, these are the things you need to do. These are 8 of the key things you need to do. And these things we've been saying need to be done for the past 20 years. You know, continuous monitoring, segment your networks so you can split between IT and OT, apply patches and updates in a way that doesn't take down operational systems. Designate an agency cybersecurity coordinator. Report all cybersecurity incidents to the Department of Homeland Security in the United States. Develop an incident response plan and conduct vulnerability assessments on a regular basis. So these are the things that the TSA has directed in the United States. Next slide will show, I believe, the agencies that are affected. It's just the major agencies right now, but in the future, it is very much expected that this will spread to all of the transit agencies that run passenger systems. And that was really the meat of my presentation, was those high consequence events. The rest of these are just, the rest of my slides are just an review of the regulatory environment, regulatory and policy environment in the United States. So thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Susan. That was really great and quite terrifying. I'll hand it over to Vince to talk about the focus group discussions now.
Thank you, and thank you. Thank you, and thank you to the speakers. Sorry, I thought I was on mute. So now we will go quickly into our breakout or focus groups. We're going to be dividing into government, transit agencies, and OEMs. That's one group. Another group will be the consulting agencies and companies. And a third group will be academia, nonprofit associations, and broader industry suppliers. And so Morgan will pull the trigger and split us up. We're going to go to 15 minutes. So basically 7.5 minutes each, and our moderators will be policing that. So please provide your comments and input. Just don't go too long so that everyone has a fair chance. The first question will be, how can the Government of Canada support innovations in the field of cybersecurity and rail operations? I have a few already based on the speakers. And then the second question would be, what might QTRIC's role be in leading the implementation of cybersecurity measures in rail operations? So with that, I'll turn it over to Morgan, who's got the magic finger.
All right. Do we have Vince back in the room?
I'm here. Sorry, Morgan. Thomas got cut off. He was just speaking. So, Thomas, I apologize for that. He literally got cut with his tongue sticking out.
No problem. No problem.
Oh, that's okay. So,
Up to the group.
sorry, we're back to the big group.
Yeah, no, I was just saying if he would like to finish his thought to the group in a bit, that would be fine as well. But I'll pass it over to you, Vince, and
Sure.
to facilitate.
So thank you everyone for your comments, albeit very brief, and we could go on forever, but we do have to stick to a schedule to honor everyone's calendar. So I will bring it back to Mark, our MC moderator. So Mark, you'll poll each group and have the person, I guess the HDR staff, to read over the comments from those each section.
Okay, so do you want to go with group one first?
Sure. So that was us. So that would be Saloni.
Yeah, I can start off, and then I think as Thomas was, as Vince mentioned, Thomas was in the middle of a pretty good idea. So I think I'll let him finish it towards the end as well. I think our first question about how can the Government of Canada support innovations in the field of cybersecurity and rail operations is a really good discussion about it. I think the general consensus was that investments are very important, and there might be an opportunity for the Government of Canada to encourage organizations or rail operators to work with technology startups. There is because of the bureaucratic nature and times with sometimes within our rail organizations, there is a bit of concern related to the adaptability to the different culture of innovation itself. TransLink was given as an example where they do have innovation days, but there might be an opportunity for the Government of Canada to work with rail operators similar to TransLink and other Metrolinx and others to identify topics that may support those innovation days that ultimately the rail operators can then implement within their organizations and work with startups, small or larger organizations, to sort of develop a proof of concept and make sure that the technology works within that within their operations. Another key point that was brought up was that the government can add more policies. Like there was a recognition that in Canada we are lacking in cybersecurity. We're far behind. In terms of what QTRIC's role may be, I think one of the things QTRIC, one of the things that was measured was. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things that was mentioned was that QTRIC can sort of act as like bring organizations together to discuss like some of the key elements of cybersecurity, whether it's measures or lessons learned, or even key trends. A good point that was brought up by Tarek was that there is expertise that exists, but not everyone has access to it. So a large organization may have a much more full-form cybersecurity group that's dedicated versus a smaller operator that may not necessarily have it, but still needs to implement it. So QTRIC could act as a consort in bringing all of these real operators together, and then maybe focus on like one or two topic areas initially to sort of discuss what needs to be done to implement the cybersecurity measures within real operations in Canada. But that said, I just want Thomas to sort of maybe wrap up his thought because we did he was in the middle of a sentence and it got cut off.
Sure, no, thank you. It wasn't too much more I had to say. Just on the topic of piloting, I think all I wanted to say was it would be extremely beneficial to identify, companies that have capacity to do piloting work. I know from experience, due to the size of our engineering department, we have some capacity to do, technology pilot programs. So, that's maybe, if you're dealing with a large complex pilot, maybe there's ways of divvying up the work between different transit authorities that have capacity, and that might be a way of tackling a larger project. But it's just an idea.
Thank you, Thomas.
Yep.
Sorry about that, but it's a great idea. And that's what QTRIC is all about, to bring organizations together to share those kind of ideas and opportunities. Back to you, Mark.
Yeah, I think really we just go to group 2, and then once we get through group 3, we can summarize.
Sure thing, yeah. So it's John here, and we run the consulting group. And so very similar to the first group, some of the ways that we identified that the government could support was through funding. Now this was funding at a national level, but it was also the idea of funding not only on capital, but also on the operations side of things. So it's not just a one-time payment to get the project going, but it's something that needs to be done continuously, not just at the beginning, which is important in order to get to something more comprehensive, where eventually the hope is that it would lead to a set of standards that we can rely on and reference for cybersecurity in Canada. And then another way that we identified the government could get involved was having a forum for transit leaders to discuss directly with government officials. And this involves both offering concerns, suggestions, advice, all sorts of things, but having a direct line of dialogue would be helpful. And this could take place in many ways. It could, I think there was an example given that this is something that used to occur in Ottawa, but whether that's hybrid, virtual, in person, location, it shouldn't be problematic to get that set up logistically, and it's something that could offer a lot of benefits to the end goal. As for the second question about what QTRIC's role might be in leading the implementation of cybersecurity, we did touch on Europe as a good example of them having strong implementation standards for cybersecurity, which we are lacking here in Canada. And over in Europe, different research groups sort of received funding for various scopes, and this included things like signaling, infrastructure, and rolling stock. And basically what QTRIC can do is kind of play the lead in helping allocate this funding amongst other research groups and sort of directing where the funding will go, so long as it's all working, all the money and the funding is going towards a shared vision and objective for the nation. Another way that we discussed that Qtrik could help is by working directly with regulators on policy making and then tying that back to funding. And one of the more sort of step back approaches, I guess you could say, we talked about was kind of reshaping the mindset of this being funding and more so an investment in the future of Canadian cybersecurity for rail. And then we talked on the age-old saying of, prevention is better than a cure. So like putting the upfront investment into cybersecurity safety will pay dividends for many years to come here in Canada. And if we just reshape the way we think about what we're asking, it could also lead to, more opportunities for money to go to the right places to get things done.
Thanks, CJ. So let's do group 3.
Hi, so for the first question, we talked about the need to support direct targeting investment in critical infrastructure that's been identified. I think several of the other groups have said that, so definitely a common theme. One of the other comments was to support tabletop panels to discuss mitigation measures. So both OT and IT, you could host panels where they could talk about what they could be doing with their systems, and so they know how to respond. And in addition, just overall support training of IT and OT staff, well, particularly OT staff, in a common cyber nomenclature, so they know how to talk to each other within transit agencies. Another item that was actually quite a good idea is that if we think that we haven't been making the investments for the last 10 years in projects, but there's a significant number of projects that are coming online now, some of which are 10 years or older and are coming online, so we could be looking at what the plans are funding for plans to develop to make sure that those projects that are coming online now can make some targeted investments in order to make sure that they're cyber secure. And one of the other items was that we know that there's interest in automated systems and fully automated systems, which are tend to be more cyber secure because they're more newer, and using those to leverage into older systems as possible. On the second question, it was noted that Qtrik could help educate, again, the cyber and OT and IT and what it requires an agency to do in order to be fluent in cyber, and how Qtrik could also help transit agencies develop solid best practices for cyber, so that folks are aware of what they should be implementing. There's also the opportunity to host roundtables with transit agencies to get them to agree on the common standards that they would be using and applying. And that there's a role that Qtrik could play as an advocate for transit agencies in the specific on cyber investment.
That's great. That's great. I think across all 3 groups, there was a lot of similarities. I think in groups 2 and 3, there was more discussion on funding by the sound of it. And group 1 was a little more of encouraging private industry to kind of help and step in with some best practices. I think one of the key things, I think, from everybody as well is the training and the cybersecurity awareness for the staff, whether it's OT staff, IT staff, senior management. Certainly, I think tabletop exercises, so it's all about the planning for the response. That's probably going to be critical. And I think Whitney just raised a point there in group three with the roundtables. It's really getting everybody on board, coming together with the newer systems that are more technologically advanced. Technologically advanced is also, potentially the shiny object for attackers. So, those systems really do have to be secured. So yeah, taking lessons learned from those and how those systems get secured is a really great idea. And of course, I think one thing we talked about in our group was the prevention better than cure. It's a lot cheaper to fix something before it breaks than it is after it breaks. And Lucia made the point of really maybe thinking about the funding in terms of an investment as opposed to a cost. I think there was a lot of good discussion. A lot of it was around collaboration, which is really good. I think, as Tarek pointed out, you can't do this in isolation. Cybersecurity is really everybody's job across all industries, but really especially for these critical infrastructure industries. On that note, I'll pass it back to Vince, unless there are any questions.
Thank you, Mark. There was a question in here that was, what are the most common attack vectors to target those crown jewels? I think that was in Susan's presentation. So what are the most common attack vectors to target those crown jewels?
I can answer that if what I see, if you want. The attack vectors I see are definitely SCADA systems, because in the old days, SCADA systems were all serial, not connected to the internet. Now they're all IP based and very often misconfigured. So if you go on your friendly neighborhood Shodan or Census cyber scanning tool that's freely available online, you're going to see hundreds of thousands of things that should not be on there. So SCADA systems are the #1 attack vector that I see from my perspective on light rail systems.
Thank you, Susan. I don't know, Lucia or Tarek, did you have any other comments you'd like to make?
I think that the good news is that generally the rail or transportation system has not been directly targeted, right? So generally the customer information system, the revenue collection type of systems have been affected, but anything to do with rail operations, fingers crossed, are not affected yet. I'm sure there have been some minor incidents here and there, but something that everybody can react to. But overall, I think I agree with Susan that ultimately, I think our challenge is that these systems cannot be internet exposed. And, because that just opens up the opportunity for anyone to attack these systems from anywhere.
I want just to add a bit on that. Yeah, I think it's spot on. There is another element. We can connect to systems even if they are not connected to the internet. So physical protection to this system is another thing that we really need to look after too, carefully, on board, on the truck side, and in general, because people can have access also with physical access to the systems.
Excellent, thank you. Mark, I turn it back to you. Did you have any questions as moderator? And there's another question that just popped up, so you might as well take care of that too.
Oh, there we go. So yeah, how can the electrical systems, such as control relays, be protected in a connected world? That's a good question.
Yes, in our call, I think access controls was the biggest challenge, I think was mentioned.
Yeah.
I can chime in real quick again. This is Susan Howard. When I worked for the electric utility, we had something in the United States called NERC-CIP, and it's a whole set of rules just on how to protect control relays in an electric utility world. And it's really pretty simple stuff. You protect those the same way you protect your IT systems, right? With access control list, managed switches, things like that. It's not rocket science. It's pretty simple. Again, like Lucia and Tarek and others were saying, it just takes collaboration between the IT and the OT folks, and it helps if you get fined, right? When there's a big fine, if you don't protect your control systems, then you tend to pay more attention than if it's just preventative.
Yeah. Actually, I did have a question for the panel. That was, how can regulators support the transit agencies with coordination across the various regulatory environments, sort of national security and law enforcement? I think that's kind of, for the panel, if there's any regulators on the line, how do they see it as well?
Can I attempt to answer that one? So there is a, I strongly believe that we need to have a top-down approach. Okay, so the regulator establish the rules. So these rules need to be cascaded and implemented downwards. So standards and other piece of regional law or let me say less top-level elements needs to harmonize with and respond to the needs of the regulator. So the regulator needs to have a strong voice in that context.
I'll add that, regulators generally respond to or react to. I think generally there's regulation, but we've seen are as a result of some national security concerns or, the law enforcement. So, we're seeing ransomware type of activity, or in the United States, Colonial Pipeline incident happened, then the Transportation Security Department moved forward and this, these events can cause a larger economic impact, not just public safety impact. So they came forward. I think the challenge really, from our perspective, is that regulators in any industry, whichever they are targeting, they need to work with more closely. I mean, they should respond to national security, right? That goes without saying, but they need to work more closely with the operators and suppliers and integrators to understand the problem and then be a little bit more precise. And more importantly, I think, when they issue a regulation, they should consider that, look, what would be the cost impact? I mean, can smaller entities or larger entities would be able to, comply with the regulations? And then more importantly, we spent a lot of time, talking about that, look, our environment is legacy, old infrastructure. Now you want to apply a new regulation based on new standards, new requirements, new technologies. So not just the cost, but are there options available, right? Are there some tools available or technologies available for these operators to actually do something, right? So I think it needs to be more thoughtful. I think, TSA started with something to a national security event. Then, their follow-on directives were a little bit more targeted or specific. And they really looked at what are the crown jewels, right? Focus on those areas. But overall, I would repeat again that, I think there needs to be a better coordination between the regulators and the operators, particularly understanding, what they should be targeting with operators' help.
Sort of advisory board. So having a sort of mechanism to put people together. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then they have to be, experts in the field, right? I mean, you cannot take a general business person, put that in there, in that advisory board. It has to be somebody who understands standards, who understands technology, who understands the real operation, its impact to it, and then cybersecurity in particular.
So better.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lucia.
Better attention to the competencies.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Tarek. Having regulators that really do understand rail operations and the limitations of the legacy systems that are associated with those railroads. Did just have one more question. We're not really getting any more questions from the general audience. So, is cybersecurity being incorporated into the various transit agencies' enterprise risk management frameworks? Or is it still kind of a separate area as opposed to really being fully integrated?
I mean, I don't want to hog, but I think I can at least give a agency perspective here. So I think the short answer is yes. I think the challenge here is the understanding of a cyber risk. I think we talked about earlier that in general, no one has really seen an impactful cyber event or incident that caused larger outages or larger risk to the safety of the riders in general. So, and on top of it, the general uh, impression on the rail operations people, they can run train under all circumstances, right? I mean, may it be rain, may it be flooding, right? I mean, they are able to run trains, fewer, but they run the trains. So they always think that they can run the train. So I think until and unless, and I'm not wishing at all, right? I think my goal is that it never happens, and maybe it's a good thing. That definitely is a good thing, I should say. Let me correct myself. That a larger incident does not happen. But I think generally people, we have seen it in so many companies, once they have a ransomware event, suddenly they become cyber focused. So the same thing within the rail operations entity, nothing has really happened, which is a good thing. So there is this learning curve on people's part. So it's really, hey, look, it hasn't happened. We don't know what those impacts are. What you're talking about probably doesn't, maybe you're trying to scare us, but we know that we can operate under all circumstances. So I think in short to your answer, yes. I mean these they are become part of our enterprise risk management plans, but they are not very specific to. I mean, what if a ransomware event impacts the onboard controller units on thousands of cars, right? How is enterprises going to address that risk? So these are the things that it needs that maturity, it needs to evolve into that.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Because I think until something does happen, everyone's kind of head in the sand for a while, and then, like you said, when it happens to an organization, any kind of attack, that's when people really do start paying attention. And none of us want that to happen.
Yes.
So I'm just going to do a quick time check with Morgan. How are we doing?
Yeah, I think if the conversation is wrapping up, we can probably end it here and move on to the last final.
There is one comment that didn't come up that I would like to just say if I could. I think that many of the agencies are considering or would like to consider how security as a service can be offered, particularly on the operations side, and cybersecurity as a service, particularly for some of their systems that are in the cloud. And it wasn't addressed per se, but certainly I think, it was talked about that we should be seeking partners on the private sector. And I think that is an area too that could be explored, both because it might be a way to do some upgrades quicker as opposed to later. And also because while operations doesn't tend to get as much focus in Canada for funding from the federal government, it is, if they were going to look at some operations funding, it is an area that they could consider.
Yeah, that did come up in our group with the operations funding. I know in the US, we typically don't get operations funding, we get capital funding. So,
yeah, but more and more of these systems are in the cloud, right? So security as a service becomes more important.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, so if we could just move on to the next slide, Jenny, thank you.
Sure. Thanks,
Okay.
Morgan.
I'll take over, Mark. So first of all, before we go further, I do want to thank Lucia, Tarek, Mark, and Susan for your time and for your valuable information that you shared with our audience. I've learned a lot, I'm sure others have, and lots of notes have been taken for sure. And I did want to point out that like I said earlier, our Smart Rail Conference is occurring on March 20th, and we're going to have this subject and many others and lots of people involved. So it's a great time to get your 30% discount for those that are here. If you'd like to register, it's in the chat. The link is there. And as well, we know that we had a number of non-members or those who are unfamiliar with Qtric. If you want to learn more about Qtric or consider membership, we'd love to have you. And that's in the chat too. So if you'd look there, that'd be great. In the meantime, our next session, our final session in Rail Innovation Consultations is occurring on February 22nd, basically a month from now. And it's on high frequency rail versus high speed rail. And it'll be the same format. And so we look forward to having everyone and many more joining us. So with that, and talk about the conference. And with that, I'm ready to close. I thank you all for attending and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Vince.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.